This video is a big compilation of every single analysis I've done on every single Tokyo Revengers story arc. It took a long time, between years, to get this whole project finished for the channel, and it's my biggest one yet. There are some audio issues with music being too loud at times in some of the videos individually, and they've been stitched together. Unfortunately, I didn't have all the files so I could, lower and raise my voice or any of the music in the background, so I apologize for that, and at times, again, you'll probably have to turn it down a little bit if you're listening in speakers or in headphones for this. If you sat through this intro, I really appreciate it, and again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy this hour-long analysis. Every single story has something to say regardless of how great or poor it may be perceived by an audience. Things may be messy, edgy, or nonsensical at times, however making a complete story in any form takes a lot of work to bring into reality. Which brings me to Tokyo Revengers, a series that stirred up a lot of discourse thanks to its peachy ending and questionable character direction. I originally jumped into this story during its later arcs and kinda rolled with it without really seeing where everything started. But again, with some comments I'd seen about the final arc, I decided it was time for me to see for myself if this story's ending was truly as bad as people thought, or if it was truly meant to be. And for that, I had to reread the entire series, or read the actual entire series. Although I personally have my gripes with the story, I rather enjoyed Tokyo Revengers. I'll be analyzing each arc of this story for your viewing pleasure and my own. With that being said, let's get into the first arc of this story. Toman, a responsibility to your future. The opening chapter gives us a clear picture of our main character Takemichi, who isn't in the best place of his life. As a deadbeat adult living in an apartment, it's clear he doesn't take care of himself. To put it bluntly, he's kind of a bum. He lives with frustrating neighbors, has a dead-end job, and nothing to aspire to, establishing him as a passive, spiteful character who doesn't have any intention of taking initiative in his life. Funnily enough, this lifestyle and mindset leads to his meeting with the story's most important aspect: time travel. Time travel can be a bit of a mess in the grand scheme of things with how its mechanics work and multi-timeline shenanigans. Thankfully, Tokyo Revengers handles it pretty well by not explaining it at all, only the catalyst for how it happens. Without this exposition, more time is spent with Takemichi reflecting on his life and how it came to be what it is in the present. He was reluctant to stand out or demand agency within his own life, creating the passive person seen in Chapter 1. Given his moment of introspection and resolve to fulfill his promise to Naoto, one would think that he'd do all he could to accomplish it. Yet, at the first sign of difficulty, he runs away. Takemichi's goal is too hard to achieve because he lacks the resolve to endure the pain of pursuing it, something he has to come to terms with when he challenges Kiyomasa. Takemichi's struggle here is an active battle against his old self. He gets beaten and battered, but he can't give in because there is nowhere for him to run anymore. He has to stand and fight. He has to face down his future even if he might die, so he can't lose because of what that defeat entails. By developing this iron resolve, he actually receives a reward.
お前本当に中学生?
The introduction of Draken and Mikey sets up a hierarchy within the story. Their easy dispatch of Kiyomasa and everyone's reverence for them highlights this perfectly. Mikey's carefree nature doesn't command respect, but his actions do. His dominating presence is what controls people's respect for him, along with his insane physical ability. He easily beats Kiyomasa while being the same size as Takemichi, setting up a distinct contrast between the two of them. Everything around Mikey moves and happens because of him. He's the one in control of what comes and goes in his life, while Takemichi has existed within the influences of others like Kiyomasa and Hina. On his own, he's helpless until he's pushed into a situation where he must act. He stands up to both Draken and Mikey to save Hina and gets rewarded by getting closer to his goal. Through connecting with the two delinquents, he's able to grow himself and come across his second target, Kisaki. However, in doing so, he and Naoto find themselves with the results of messing with time. Takemichi's interaction with Akun is a mixture of his past and present actions. He prevented Akun from being arrested in the past, saving his future, but meeting him in the present seals his fate. The two friends were direct mirrors, having started as delinquents, taking different paths to reach their mutually terrible lives. Takemichi's criticism of Akun shows how much they have separated and changed. Akun's talk of the past is his way of trying to change something that can no longer be changed. He's caged by his decisions, and the only way out of his tragic life is death. As a result of this tragedy, death weighs heavy on Takemichi's shoulders. It's what pushes him forward to want to save everyone. In order to acquire that, he needs to get over his first hurdle in the form of Mobius. Mobius's heinous actions get them targeted by Toman, however it's these actions that lead to Draken forcing Mikey to apologize. Here, the message of the arc could be described in one word: responsibility. the responsibility of taking up for your life and actions along with their consequences, a concept well represented by Mikey and Takemichi, respectively. Takemichi runs from the difficulties of the promise he swore to see through. Mikey doesn't understand why he must apologize when he didn't do anything wrong. The difference between them is how they approach responsibility, playing to their separate weaknesses as characters. Takemichi resolved to change and grow as a person on his own in order to fully embrace the role he chose. On the other hand, Mikey needs Draken to be his compass for what he needs to take accountability for. This goes hand in hand with his descent in the present timeline after Draken dies. Both he and Takemichi operate on two different mindsets. One sees what he has to be responsible for, and the other lets someone else tell him what he has to be responsible for. These interactions in regard to this arc's central characters makes responsibility its key takeaway and theme to think about when reading. The Toman arc gives a nice introduction for what's to come through the characters, a main objective for the story, and established dynamics between said characters. It does what it needs to do, leaving further development for what's to come without giving up too much information or making things too complicated early on. I'm falling in love with Tokyo Revengers all over again, and I can't wait to enjoy more of it. Next week won't be anything pertaining to Tokyo Revengers, unfortunately, but the week after will be, so please stay tuned for that. I'll be covering the Mobius arc. Take care of yourselves, and be sure to have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you all next time. Welcome back everyone to part 2 of my Tokyo Revengers analysis. Since this is my first official series on this channel, I wanted to share some of my thoughts at the beginning of each video so you guys can understand my headspace when progressing through this story. So, having finished the Toman arc, I can comfortably say it's a strong introduction. Setup and character interplay felt really organic and made everything feel like steps were taken to establish a proper jumping off point. The small moments with Takemichi and his friends were especially refreshing and pretty realistic when I think of how middle schoolers would interact. They really stand out since you have 30-year-old middle schoolers and a kid who weighs $120 soaking wet able to obliterate damn near fully grown adults. Though all of it plays into the world's charm and gives it a bit of its own identity. More so than its charm, I enjoy its messaging and characters, which I'll get into some more today with all of you. Let's start part 2 of this analysis. This is Tokyo Revengers' second story arc, Mobius. A struggle to live in spite of death. Starting from where we left off, Takemichi and Naoto meet up with Mobius' old leader, Osanai, in order to gather information about Draken's death. After getting what they could, Takemichi returns to the past and has a sweet moment with Akun. Already, Takemichi takes on an active role in trying to both keep his friend from the gang life and save Draken. Once again, in trying to make his presence known within the story, he becomes quite brash, acting without a plan to do this through more subtle means. Interestingly, his forward approach does not earn him a reward, but a wake-up call through a pretty bad beating. Takemichi is overstepping his boundaries, overconfident and ignorant as to where he stands in Toman. Just when everything seems lost, Draken wants to hear him out, but this drives a wedge between himself and Mikey. The conflict between the two friends builds off their established dynamic from the hospital scene and approach to situations. Mikey's cold, unshakable nature opposes Draken's stern, cautious one to a degree that makes them feel like equals in Toman rather than a leader speaking to a second in command. To Mikey, defying him is defying Toman, but Draken is simply advising a safer option to all-out war. Mikey's inability to make that distinction is exactly why he needs someone to direct him. His eyes are obscured by hair, while Draken's eyes are clear to see, communicating the emotional versus logical minds at play here. Before reaching a fever pitch, Osanai appears. In contrast to his older self, his boastful, prideful entrance paints a vivid picture of how different he has become, giving credence to how the delinquent life corrupts, setting up the decline such a lifestyle brings into adulthood. It's either crime, death, or dead-end jobs. Truly, the unholy trinity. Following this unexpected interruption, Osanai inflicts a one-sided beating on Pachin, a beating that reflects the one Pa inflicted upon Takemichi. Not only that, he and Takemichi share a similar drive to fight hell and back for what they believe in. A drive that Mikey can't help but admire, smiling as his friend gets beaten. It's only when his friend cannot fight anymore does he step in. Toman is his only family, and no matter what, he will defend it, even when that family in particular may be in the wrong, because Mikey has basically no one by his side. His brother is gone and he has no other biological family. He's someone who doesn't want to lose anyone else. Albeit a sweet sentiment, it's one that would invalidate his friend's eventual sacrifice. Pa strayed from being just a delinquent, the very thing Draken explained to Osanai. Mikey's reliance on emotion prevents logical thought, while Draken's logic shorts his emotional response, something that comes to a head when the two are about to fight. They use fighting as a last resort, instead resorting to throwing things at each other. It takes an angry Takemichi to reaffirm the two's bond, bringing them back down to earth. Draken and Mikey lack perspective in respect to how their actions affect everything around them, the destruction of Takemichi's precious valuables being a prime example. Those valuables represent Toman's current state, being that when Draken and Mikey are at odds, things begin to break down. All of Toman looks up to them, so under pressure they have to accept what cannot be changed so everyone can stay together. It's this exact divide that causes Toman's run-in with a new enemy, Valhalla. Pei is who Mikey was when Paul got arrested. Moments pertaining to Pei and Paul's relationship were few, but Toman's all for one and one for all mentality bypasses a need to build up their relationship for this betrayal to be effective. If Toman is a family, then leaving one of their own behind shouldn't be possible. It's that feeling Mikey understands and why he forgives Pei. His and Draken's selfish behavior pushed him to feel like nothing was being done, like no one cared. Mikey's forgiveness is his apology, because this matter was his to take responsibility for. Draken's fall here brings out who Takemichi was meant to be. He doesn't have peerless courage, an iron grip on his sadness, or fight as proficiently as others around him. All he has is an unwavering determination to keep going in spite of all he doesn't have and face any odds, no matter how insurmountable they may seem, that are placed in front of him. All he needs is the people behind him to believe in his ability, even if it means getting stabbed in the hand or getting beaten. So long as they are at his back, he will stand again. Sorry to break for a moment, but I absolutely love this frame in particular. Takemichi and Draken standing battered and bloodied in the rain, ready to die for what they believe in, is just absolute gold. I mean, the only thing I get from this panel is a sense of understanding between two people, and I absolutely love it. Also, Takemichi's shirt reading peace and love while in the middle of war and hate is amazing irony. Okay, that's enough of that. Let's get back to the analysis. Beyond the shadow of a doubt, Takemichi's actions up until this point haven't been meaningless. They've been building up those who have never had the courage to fight for themselves, in turn saving his life. In the same way his guts saved him from Kiyomasa, he receives the same reward now thanks to the intervention of his friends. They all don his determined smile, ready to fight for their lives, in contrast to he and Draken smiling in the face of certain death. It's that constant theme of death that floats throughout these events, which makes it feel so heavy, but also emphasizes the appreciation of life itself during this arc. In the previous arc, fighting for your life in the face of death was present throughout and carries over to this arc. However, it's the softer moments that balance everything out, from Takemichi spending time in the park with his friends to Mikey's relief at Draken's life being saved. Death is just as important as life within this story, a message heavily represented by the Mobius symbol, the Ouroboros. The snake that eats its own tail means eternity and the circle of life, the same thing Takemichi will probably be going through until he's able to save Hina from death. Unfortunately, our time together is short. That's all I have for this week. I'll see you all next time for the Valhalla arc. Until then, please stay safe out there and have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you guys in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 3 of my Tokyo Revengers analysis. I know it's been a long time, but I still fully intend on completing this series as it's my first big project on this channel. In preparations for this video, I reread the entirety of the Valhalla arc to remember anything I'd forgotten and rewrote my analysis for this arc so I can give you the best I've got. So without any further ado, please sit back and enjoy as we enter the gates of Valhalla together. Opening this next arc of the story with Hina's funeral as the first scene was quite bitter. Hina's fate is the driving force for the story so far and doubles down on Takemichi's efforts thus far, feeling a bit worthless. Saving Hina isn't a simple task, but a way to build up this ongoing mystery as to who exactly needs to be targeted. It's rather interesting for Toman's descent into an underground crime ring to be hinged on this guess who type of writing style, because Takemichi and Naoto are forced to think more critically about the situation. It creates a far more engaging dynamic than the story is given credit for, because it's so tightly interwoven with Takemichi's character. The closer this mystery is to being solved, the more he develops. Speaking of development, Naoto and Takemichi pay a visit to Draken of this current timeline where he reveals that Kisaki is the main target to chase after. A moment like this feels as bittersweet as the last because it's another failure in Takemichi's face. Despite current circumstances, there is some beautiful imagery in this section displaying a clear difference in power and motive between Draken and Kisaki. The light of the outside shines to reveal a sense of duality inside of Kisaki versus Draken's commitment to the life he chose. All this paints a scene of what life of a delinquent leads to when things get out of hand. It leads to a dragon in a cage wishing it could fly amongst the clouds like the hawk it watches flying far above. Thanks to Draken's information, Takemichi shifts his focus to Kisaki as the man himself is elected Toman's 3rd Division captain. Takemichi arriving at this moment in time to see this event firsthand is a bit cruel because things have already been set into motion. The inevitability of Hina's death seems unavoidable unless he can do something to stop it, which brings him to his boiling point. Although a somewhat meaningless outburst as Takemichi gets on the wrong side of Toman, in a strange twist, another is there to save him. Baji's appearance is as random as his departure from Toman is. His introduction serves to give more information on Toman's founding and sets up this arc's conflict. His connection with Mikey is especially important because of what Toman is to him. Toman is Mikey's big family, so its founding members, Baji, Pa, Draken, and Mitsuya, would act as an immediate family of sorts. They're the ones he holds closest to his heart, which gives way to a very dangerous deal for both characters. The deal is not only mutually beneficial, it's mutually destructive. Takemichi and Mikey are willing to go as far as they need to protect those they care for, drawing a connection between them once again as we've seen in the previous arcs. One puts himself on the line while the other places the lives of others at risk. What they're willing to give up is different, yet for their respective happiness. If Takemichi fails, then Kisaki kills Hina. If Mikey fails, then his family will never be whole again. This is another test of Takemichi's will and dedication to his promise. Unfortunately for the both of them, what happens next is completely out of their control.
あれもしかしてもう学校って終わってる
Kazutora's first meeting with Takemichi mirrors Mikey's. He takes Takemichi from his classroom, shows his power in the form of his abused subordinates, and nonchalantly treats others like they aren't even human, all with a smile on his face. Hina even appears, but Takemichi doesn't need her to interfere this time, a sign of his growth throughout these retries. Nevertheless, he's placed in a dangerous situation when arriving at Valhalla's hideout, and Baji is there to show the extent of his cruelty, even committing to the plan of killing Mikey. It's hard to believe that Baji is anything but a wild card to truly set this conflict between Valhalla and Toman into motion, but his backstory with Kazutora shows that he's more than what meets the eye. Kazutora and Baji's flashback showing their greatest mistake when trying to steal Mikey a new motorcycle is both dark and somewhat confusing. Shinichiro has been an important character for Mikey and someone Takemichi has been compared to. Seeing his demise for the first time makes us as an audience feel lost, like Mikey, I think. Shinichiro only wanted to give his little brother something he wanted, but it's that same little brother's friends who put him down. It's not Mikey's fault, but one could argue he was the spark for this wildfire to happen, which is where Kazutora's resentment of his former friend began. During a first reading of this, it can be confusing. However, upon rereading and writing this, redirecting responsibility as a child to another can be understood perfectly. Of course, this reality hits both Kazutora and Baji differently, a sign of both characters' differing levels of maturity and what they're willing to accept as their fault going forward, which brings about the ironic paralleled introductions of Kazutora and Mikey. It was a reminder of the connection these two characters share and their warped psyches. How far are they willing to go for what they want? But more so, are they willing to kill for it? This question is something both Kazutora and Mikey would have to answer going into their gang war. Valhalla vs. Toman is a battle of brothers. Kazutora is by all accounts crazy, but not without understanding. He's still able to maintain his calm when needed and uses his opponent's weakness against him, even going as far as to hit Mikey with the same attack he did to Shinichiro. When he put an end to Shinichiro, he was forced to choose sides, himself or Mikey. In his mind, Mikey was the cause of his suffering, so Kazutora chose himself above all others, and Baji stood beside him when he was at his lowest, the same way Baji stood beside Mikey for so long. As stated before, Baji has been a wild card this entire arc, joining Valhalla, beating Chifuyu, and proclaiming he would aid in Mikey's murder. All of this to cut ties for a chance to stop Kisaki, a chance to save his friends from being manipulated into a trap. However, his suspicions of Kisaki would never be confirmed without any proof, and he had no way to prove it. So on his last legs, he leaves his treasures for Takemichi, someone who reminds him of Shinichiro, and passes on. Baji loved Toman. They are his friends, his family, and his home. Kazutora was a big part of that. He suffered with Kazutora because he had just as much responsibility for Shinichiro's death as he did. He defended his treasures with all he had to prevent their inevitable destruction. Kazutora just wanted to make you happy, Mikey. That's why he can't accept it, even though he killed your brother. To make himself believe he wasn't the bad guy, Kazutora had no choice but to decide you were his enemy. The story has Kazutora as Mikey's mirror in action and demeanor, even down to the people they've interacted with. The only difference is how these interactions end. One the murderer, the other the victim. But now Mikey has control and the second difference comes into play. Emotion. Mikey and Kazutora's faces are inversions of each other. A cheeky smile can be just as dangerous as a stoic, straight face. The depths beneath both expressions are unknowable. It's only when the focus of both shifts to Baji that they lose all control of themselves. Kazutora cries while Mikey loses himself to anger. Again, I labeled Baji as a wild card, and I stand by that description because his plan of action felt so wildly chaotic. Like he didn't have a real, reliable plan to begin with. His effect is very personal, and yes, he does end up saving his friends, but at the cost of himself. And it's not even him or his real influence in terms of words or interaction with them that stops it. It's his charm that brings everything to a head. The flashback of Toman's creation is the foundation of Mikey's character, where all of his closest friends come together with him. First meant to defend Kazutora against the Black Dragons, but now it's far beyond that. It's the start of a new era, where everyone could see the delinquents aren't just a bunch of troublemakers, but kids with something to prove and morals to back them up. A gang that would stand by one another no matter the odds. That is the Toman built by its founding members. The Toman Mikey and Kazutora forgot. The conclusion of this conflict is exactly what it should be, with Toman and Valhalla joining together by way of Kazutora's formal reinduction into Toman's ranks even after all he's done. It's a reminder of the same kindness Mikey showed Pei and the true nature of his heart at the end of the day. On top of all this, Takemichi's nomination as Toman's first division captain shows there's still hope for him to change his future after failing to save Baji. However, this development does very little for the changes in the future, as Toman is still evil and Takemichi is the reason Hina is dead in this future. A symbolic narrative beat towards Takemichi's repeated failed attempts to save her. Now, with another future in shambles, the only thing left to do is stop the man behind everything from altering the future. Kisaki Teta. In my personal opinion, this arc is probably the best we've covered so far. Kazutora and Mikey's dynamic is especially enjoyable to read when picking up the story for a second read-through, because you're able to pick up on stuff you never were before. The arc's name, Valhalla, is a very clever choice for this arc too, as in Norse mythology it is a place where fallen heroes in battle are received. This ties in with both the deaths of Shinichiro and Baji, who directly influenced Mikey and Kazutora's descent. However, Baji embodies this more so because he falls in battle so he can save his two old friends. Speaking of fallen heroes, Takemichi's return to the future and facing the ramifications of his actions in this arc see him embody the theme of a fallen hero. A hero who wanted to save the woman he loved only to end up being her indirect killer and falling into a pit of despair with seemingly no way out. It is only through Naoto he can find the strength to stand again to fight. Kisaki outwitting him at the end with Chifuyu being put down is a sad end, yes, but one Takemichi must return to zero in order to rewrite. It's another step towards truth and real change. Valhalla is an arc about forgiveness, from Mikey and Kazutora reforging their relationship to Naoto forgiving Takemichi for his part in Hina's death. Furthermore, these actions have lasting effects that will save Takemichi and will ring throughout the rest of the story, but that will be understood much later on. This has been my analysis of the Valhalla arc, and it's another arc in the books. Next time we'll enter the Black Dragons arc, something I have read ahead on, and I can say for sure I am going to enjoy analyzing it. I hope you'll continue to join me on my journey through Tokyo Revengers, but in the meantime, stay safe out there and have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you all next time. Welcome back everyone to part 4 of my Tokyo Revengers story analysis. It's been a short while since we last visited this series, but my thoughts on it are still quite fresh. The Valhalla arc provided some very emotional moments that would go on to influence the main players in the Black Dragons arc current, whilst building up to an apex that seems to be arriving relatively soon. However, hindsight is 2020, and there is one glaring issue I took with the Valhalla arc, and that happens to be Baji. I labeled Baji as a wild card in my previous analysis, and I stand by that assessment of his character. He appears to serve the plot for the arc and is disposed of in the same arc. His message about saving his friends is seemingly undercut because he sacrificed himself, which ended up harming them more than helping or protecting them. He's a complicated case because he exists for an arc and the explanation for his absence makes sense. Now, I'm not saying you can't have a character exist for an arc just to push that arc forward, but something about him being here one moment and gone the next felt super wrong to me, especially after he meant so much to Mikey. Pa, for example, was used much in the same way, but his inclusion pushes a proper understanding of what a delinquent shouldn't be, which is a message that lingers throughout the story. Baji is strictly there to move the plot forward, and we're meant to care that he dies when we've barely had any time to spend with him. He doesn't feel like a wasted character, he served his purpose after all. I just think that he could have been included into the story more before he died, as his friendship with Mikey is more told than shown, but that's more of a writing decision. Alright, Enough personal gripes. This week we have the Black Dragons arc, a section of the story that offers some sibling drama, underrated character change, and a demonstration of how bad delinquency has gotten in Japan. Prepare yourselves as we enter the Black Dragons arc, a story of familial drama. The Black Dragons arc picks up right where Valhalla left off, with Takemichi returning from another torn future, pushing him ever forward down this road he's on until he crashes into two people essential to the future: Hakai and Yuzuha Shiba, two siblings who are relatively normal kids and a breath of fresh air since they are probably the only people with Toman association that Takemichi does not meet through violence. Hakai particularly seems deliberately normal. He's respectful, feels nervous around women, gets embarrassed rather easily, and isn't quick to anger, but he does look up to Mitsuya so much that he has him as his phone's wallpaper, viewing him as an older brother. Couple this with Yuzuha's phone wallpaper being of Hakai, and it's a recipe for maybe a little bit too attached siblings. Their point of normalcy is understandable once their older brother Taiju is introduced though. Taiju stands in direct opposition to his siblings. He is a chaotic character to say the least, and from his introduction is a complete and utter monster physically and mentally. He's probably given Takemichi his worst beating thus far, even without knowing who he was. More importantly, his control over Hakai using his words tells how deeply rooted he is in his younger brother's psyche. When he backhands Yuzuha, he shows that he is a physical, domineering presence over her and controls both of them through both words and physical abuse. He's an abuser through and through, so he's meant to be unlikable from the outset, someone not to be sympathized with at all. He gives off this aura that no other antagonist before him seemed to have. He's huge and wild like a tornado, delivering an immediate contrast to Mikey because his strength matches his physique, yet his position in this story contrasts Mitsuya, who shares a spotlight with him. These two older brothers are nothing if not opposites from physique to speech and manners. This frame and subsequent conversation says all there needs to be said about the two of them as characters. Taiju is an individual that expresses his thoughts and feelings through violence and aggression. Mitsuya expresses his thoughts and feelings through rational thinking and discourse. This dichotomy that they share is essential to Hakai and Yuzuha because of what they both mean to them, but more so Hakai. Hakai has served under Mitsuya, becoming part of his family from an early age. Mitsuya has shown him kind love, while Taiju has shown him rigid, jagged love. Yet his understanding of the wounds Taiju inflicted and the stitches Mitsuya applied have left him with ugly scars that remind him of what he still is. He's weak, which is why he resolves to murder Taiju instead of beating him into submission. A decision like this shows how delinquency has been used as a face for committing heinous crimes. In this story, there's been a continuous chain of cause and effect. Whenever someone wants to kill another, it never works out in their favor. Draken's assassination was a bust. Baji's assassination too was a bust. Every time a weaker individual uses cowardly tactics to ensure success, they fail and are punished in one way or another. Cowardice stems from fear, and fear stems from weakness. The bullies from the Toman arc were scared of losing the respect that they had built up for themselves, so they resorted to killing Draken. Kazutora was scared of being alone and betrayed, so he resorted to killing Baji. And Hakai is scared of not being able to protect his family, so he resolves to kill Taiju. Hakai is this arc's coward who provides a major turning point in the narrative. He's a connector of all players now about to make their moves to approach the upcoming conflict with the Black Dragons. Interestingly of them all is Takemichi and Shifuyu allying with Kisaki because both of them know what he is and what he's capable of. Even after giving 100,000 yen or $670 for information, he's nowhere near trusted, and that's expected. Yet Takemichi relenting is both sad and foolish. He partners up with Shifuyu's killer, Hina's killer. His decision here is a sign of his desperation, and at the end of the arc has affected his decision making greatly. No greater is this clouded vision of Takemichi shown more so than when he breaks it off with Hina. A decision like this has felt somewhat predictable because of who he is. Takemichi has endured plenty of hardship, but cannot seem to understand the necessity of those people he does it all for. He's always fighting the war by himself in his mind, undermining the efforts so many others put in to help him weather the storm directly or indirectly. Cutting people off does nothing for him except leave him twisting in the wind before he faces off against Taiju. The Christmas showdown is more than a personal conflict. It's more than just about the future. It's the essence of brotherhood and true connection with others. First things first though. After a completely expected betrayal by Kisaki, Mitsuya and Shifuyu arrive on the scene to help Takemichi as Hakai is paralyzed by fear despite all that is at stake. His personal struggle stops him from being any help for the group and manifests itself in more than his submission to fear, but living a lie. Hakai is an inherently flawed individual because of what he is, not who he is. He's caring, kind, and wants to protect those close to him. The coward and liar prohibit him from acting on these stand-up aspects of his character. The wounds which created his scars are what he thinks of, not the stitches made for them to heal. He hasn't changed enough since meeting Mitsuya. He's submitted to his scars and believes if he disposes of the wounds that created them, he'll be better for it. He fails to see that being weak is okay. It's not about the wounds that scarred him, it is what he does in spite of them. Mitsuya pushes him to look inward for strength rather than outward. His story and role as a proper older brother for Hakai is received too little too late, pulling him in a direction he couldn't fathom walking in. Mitsuya gave him a moral code and a stable place to stand on. On the other hand, Taiju has pushed him down a road of set expectations and what he should be inside of his mind. Both of them bring out different sides of Hakai. It is Taiju that brings out the worst in his younger brother, and by extension, he is the one in control of his actions. Funnily enough, a strong connector of these three characters is their hair colors. Mitsuya has silverish hair, Hakai's hair is a dark blue, and Taiju's hair is a mixture between both. It's a detail that would have fit more on Hakai because of his relationship with Mitsuya and Taiju, but his short hair matches up with Mitsuya's similarly short hair, the dark blue coloring matching up with Taiju, and the short hair matching up with Mitsuya, giving a good contrast in his character. The concentration of dark blue in Taiju's hair shows how dominant his violent tendencies are over himself and his brother. His silverish hair, like Mitsuya's, shows the genuine love he feels for his brother though. However, it's lost in a large amount of dark blue hair. Taiju's violence pushes Hakai to stray from a true delinquent, but Mitsuya and Yuzuha aren't much better though. He's pushed a moral code on Hakai. He's forced him into a position where he's trying to appeal to Mitsuya's faith in him. Yuzuha has removed his agency by taking on his mission of killing Taiju. No one has related to his struggle. He's been pushed around by others' expectations and their protection. He didn't develop into a young man, so he cowers like a child. When Takemichi starts talking to Hakai, he doesn't act like an older brother or protector. He simply tells Hakai how it is and what his course of actions will lead to. Fighting Taiju and placing their lives on the line to save Hakai and teach him something valuable. That's what everyone's been doing in word but not practice. Hakai and Takemichi are the same because their weakness is their redeeming quality. Hakai is weak-willed, but that is what makes him so kind to those he calls friends because they don't care that he is. Takemichi is physically weak, but that is what makes him understand the struggles of everyone else so easily. They're opposites and better for it because in this arc, they fill in what the other lacks. Even after his lie, it doesn't change anything because Hakai never knew what it meant to fight in spite of being weak. Takemichi gave him the courage to tell the truth and stand up to fight beside everyone who fought to protect him. Hakai has his moment of realization that even if everyone else is weak, they have the strength of others to lift them up. So he stands up to fight the man who poisoned him with fear his entire life. He stands with those who showed him compassion, those who have been fighting with him this entire Christmas night. His real family, his real brothers, which brings this to Yuzuha and Mikey's subsequent arrival. Yuzuha has endured a lot. Far more than she should, and even more than she should have shouldered alone. The dynamic of these three siblings have been on her back since their mother passed, and it shows. She takes on Hakai's suffering by surviving any and all of what Taiju throws at her because he's suffering too. The loss of their mother forced her to shoulder the pain of her brothers, to facilitate the lie of Hakai being what he would become in the future. However, outsiders, no, family saved her from being alone. A testament to what it means to have meaningful connections, and the easiest way to solve your problem is not always the correct way to go about things. Yuzuha and Hakai were victims who endured horrible abuse, but would killing Taiju really have healed them? From the future shown, the answer is no, it wouldn't have. Yet not killing Taiju placed everyone in a lose-lose situation until Draken and Mikey make the save. Throughout this ordeal, Mikey has been clearly losing himself more and more. After Shinichiro, Baji, and Kazutora, he's been getting chipped away piece by piece, losing himself to the traumatic circumstances haunting his life, and when he looks like he's fallen off into the deep end, he comes back up to air by cherishing what is left of his loved ones and braving the difficult road of moving forward. A tastefully done through line for his character that connects to the siblings' struggle simultaneously. Furthermore, Mikey firing Kisaki is an extension of him being in control of his emotions and capable of making logical decisions that aid Toman. He seemed to understand that he needs someone to bring him back from the darkness when he becomes lost in it. He seemed to find balance in his life going forward. Everything should have worked. Toman should have been okay until the end of this arc happened. This future is worse than the last. Everyone is gone, and again, it is indirectly Takemichi's fault. He left Toman behind. He left Mikey behind. For Mikey, it was like losing his brother all over again, losing his light again while Takemichi pushed forward. Mikey fell from a height he couldn't survive. He's killed everyone because he lost to his pain. No longer was he a delinquent, friend, or victim for that matter. He became a killer, and the fire for Takemichi to take up his role as a survivor and the predictable savior. Takemichi's desperation and Mikey's trauma come into full effect during this arc to disastrous effect. Takemichi's faced one-sided odds before, but this time they felt overwhelmingly so. Mikey's finale in the arc had been brewing for a bit, yet the serial murders felt so out of left field. While Kisaki's hand in their murders previously made sense, Mikey's outburst in this timeline falls less into the category of wow, that makes sense, and more so, okay, why though? Anyway, we've wrapped up this arc, and it wasn't too bad all things considered. Next time we'll be covering an arc I'm not too fond of, but maybe on a reread that will change. Thank you all so much for watching. Please stay safe out there and have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you all next time. Welcome back everyone to part 5 of my Tokyo Revenger story analysis. I want to start things off by saying I don't mean to be random or sporadic with my uploading for this series. I want to make sure that I'm taking ample breaks from the story so the next time I make a video about it, corners aren't being cut and I can deliver the best analysis I can in my eyes. Weekly videos on differing stories or topics within stories keep the freshness in my mind and keeps my interest as well. I fully intend on finishing this series before the end of the year, so I thank you for your patience. Moving on though, looking back on the previous arcs of this story, I began to see a trend taking form from the past 2 arcs that this arc continues. That trend being specific arc-related characters, with Baji and Yuzuha being the prime examples. Baji and Yuzuha both serve a similar role in instigating the central conflict of the arcs they are introduced in, but they are there to serve the story for that arc and nothing more. While I don't see this as an issue in storytelling as a whole, it's making the audience care about these single arc characters that does matter. If per se they had been introduced as characters of some greater importance like Baji was supposed to before the arcs they are key in, the problems they face could have been more emotionally charged for the audience. When looking at these characters, they serve a narrative and thematic purpose, yes, but I have no attachment to either of them as characters. All I could say when reading the stories behind them was, wow, that's awful. I wonder how Takemichi will connect with them. The story has geared me to care more about how Takemichi will affect them in the story rather than how they will affect the story itself. It stops the characters from being their own persons in the story and more pieces to fit into a puzzle, which is really sad because Baji and Yuzuha are interesting characters to me. However, despite this trend carrying over into the Tenjiku arc, it is not indicative of the quality of the material for this week at all. So without any more stalling, let's dive into the Tenjiku arc. The arc that could have ended the entire story. Beginning this arc are 2 flashbacks for the characters of Mitsuya and Emma. These flashbacks serve 2 different purposes with a similar end goal. Mitsuya's expands on his philosophy of family and not hating the situation he was born into. Emma's is purely for some background on where she comes from and her relationship to Mikey. This introduction seemingly centralizes the 2 as key characters for this section of the story, and the relationship they share with Draken may play a large part of that. But an assault on Toman by a rival gang brings things into focus. A mysterious gang popping up out of nowhere might have been a decent mystery had the Black Dragons not done it in the first place, and Kisaki revealing himself to be the mastermind right off the bat. Kisaki taking on a direct central role as an antagonistic force was bound to happen eventually, and with this reveal there is a sense of finality that comes with it. Kisaki has always posed a sizable threat, but with his knowledge of Toman's ins and outs, he's much more dangerous than before. There's always been a conscious effort to destroy Toman by all other threats we've seen prior to Tenjiku, but this time there's a distinct level of brutality and organization to this attack that is meant to break Toman down completely. Ex-leaders from other gangs like the Black Dragons and the Hatani brothers, who made an appearance all the way back in the Valhalla arc, have converged into one unit for Toman to face, except the odds seem insurmountable because Toman has never been hit like this before. This makes Kisaki out to be on another level compared to everyone that came before him. He builds tension and places himself at the heart of this conflict. Unbeknownst to him though, a request by one of Tenjiku's big 4, Kakucho, sets Takemichi on a path to save Izana Kurokawa, Tenjiku's leader, from Kisaki's control. Kakucho is an interesting addition to the roster because there's never been anyone from an enemy faction who's asked Takemichi for his help or had any real connection to him except for Kisaki. Furthermore, the idea of Kisaki being a time leaper looming over everything puts everything that's happened in the story into perspective. No matter how many times Takemichi fixes something in the past, he always is at a loss by the end. Each time Naoto and he think they've pinned down the root cause for the deaths in the future, Kisaki always finds a way to make things swing into his favor. Therefore, coming to this conclusion makes sense, but there's a possible major crack in this logic. If Kisaki was messing with the timeline, wouldn't there be a change in Takemichi's memories too? Naoto has shown that when the past has changed, he remembers these changes. So unless this knowledge of changing timelines works exclusively with the Time Leaper and their partner, it might be a potential hole in this theory's logic to consider. Or at least that was the thought before Naoto and Takemichi are interrupted during their meeting with Taiju about the uprising of Toman in the present timeline by Kisaki and his forces. Under the assumption Kisaki was overseas, his appearance to execute both Takemichi and Naoto here makes him being a Time Leaper all that much more plausible. Not to mention Naoto's death seals Takemichi from returning to the future, adding to the pile of setbacks that he already faces. He is left completely alone with the loss of Naoto weighing on him, but like before, Hina is there to pick him up when he's at his lowest. It's a moment to emphasize the bonds that he makes are not just important in name, but in practice. Takemichi's influence is something worth his own acknowledgement because, as Chifuyu reminds him, they are all in this together. His level of dedication matters, and that dedication rewards him once more when he's faced with Mucho's revealed alliance with Izana, as Koko assures his survival alongside Inupi. Inupi is a character that follows a number of people in this story who see another as a hero or light in their lives. Kakucho had Takemichi as his light until Izana took his place. Kisaki refers to Takemichi as a hero as well, and Inupi saw Shinichiro in a similar light. This attachment or reverence speaks to the impressionable nature of these children because they want someone who has a heart stronger than they possess or an ambition that they can follow. In essence, they desire a role model to look up to, people who can help them become better people or grow into adults. As it stands though, this is a situation where children are leading children. Furthermore, having Takemichi grow into a proper adult from these conflicts makes Inupi placing his life in his hands the right choice for him and pushes the story forward at the same time. Takemichi growing into a responsible adult is a large part of his character arc after all. However, while he tries to be a righteous, upright adult, the next major event of this story was a product of children leading children to the bitter end of disgusting ideals and goals. When it comes to the character deaths in this story, there's always been a trend from the loss of Shinichiro, Baji, Emma, Aku, Naoto, Hinata, Chifuyu, and so on. They've had a profound effect on Takemichi and Mikey given their respective connections to those people. Every time any one of them passes, the audience is left to dwell on how they will affect these two characters. After everything Takemichi's been through, the suffering he's endured to last him a lifetime, he's been able to find a way to stand up thanks to the people around him, giving him the strength he needs. These connections were thanks to his innate desire to be better, to be stronger. However, the opposite applies to Mikey. Standing at the top of a life where he reigns supreme, there's a distinct sense of isolation that he's experienced since he's lost his brother. No matter the timeline alterations, the heartache within Mikey never leaves him. It never changes. That darkness follows him every leap and festers, chipping away at him piece by piece, blow by blow. And he couldn't accept any of those losses. No one could. Yet the battle against Tenjiku has to happen, and Takemichi stands at the forefront because he is the only one who can. So he leads the charge against Tenjiku, placing his life on the line once more, and with the smallest fighting force imaginable for Toman, it's here that this arc cements itself as the finale for this story. When taking all the other arcs into consideration, there's been an escalation in stakes and disturbing conduct from these children. What started as brutal yet comical beatdowns with an apparent darkness to this life progressively evolved from beefs between gangs that could be settled in a fist fight to fights where someone before, during, or after the battle has to die. Chifuyu calling this a fight between kids is an understatement. That wanting to cling to what delinquency started as versus where it's ended up makes the statement virtually meaningless. You have children breaking arms, legs, and using weaponry to get their way. People are fighting with no regard for human life at all, or the love of being able to test themselves. They have no respect for what a delinquent is. Tenjiku wants to become Japan's darkness. That is what Toman itself fights against, and what makes someone like Takemichi the greatest example of a delinquent. As a delinquent, he never chooses to kill, only to fight so he can leave his mark somewhere in the world while upholding his morals. To be noticed, respected, and to be strong is what many delinquents want, if not all of them. They all chase those three things, but the way many go about it is misguided because they have no idea how to balance the means and the ends of their actions. Their desires become too much to achieve through normal means. Each and every gang has been concerned with the individual players being noticed or respected, never all of the members who make these gangs possible. Toman's ideals of protecting, saving one's family and friends is what sets them apart. Any delinquent can find a home in Toman because that's what it was made for. Mikey's return to face Izana is a moment he has to face the pain of his family at the most unstable part of his life. He's nowhere near recovered from everything he's lost, but understanding that someone has been struggling more than he has, he reaches out his hand. This decision was not just to save Izana, but himself as well. To save the last of his family that needed it, and to ensure he wasn't alone. Unfortunately, Izana had given up the idea of being saved a long time ago, leaving him completely alone in this world. The two have a stark contrast in upbringing and circumstances. Izana is an orphan who had no one except a servant who was practically forced to share his dream. Mikey was raised by his loving grandfather and loved by his siblings. Izana's relationship with his second-in-command Kakucho is a clear opposition to Mikey and Draken. Izana wanted to claim something, someone who would make him feel like he was worth something. That twisted nature born from his isolation fed into Kakucho's feelings of dependence on him. For Mikey and Draken, they had adults who cared for them, making them feel wanted, which enabled them to make meaningful relationships. These two always had a mutual respect and care for one another. Looking at their past and relationship with their second-in-command, it's clear that Izana had a low amount of self-worth from the start. The people around Mikey gave him the respect and love he needed to feel like he mattered. Izana just never had that. He belonged nowhere. He was related to no one, so his existence mattered to no one except for his friend who was meant to be a servant, never a friend. However, thanks to the previous arcs, the family he's lost, Mikey became Izana in a way. He knew his pain and reached his breaking point. After losing Emma, Mikey was hanging on by a thread, trying to grasp for any one part of his family even if they weren't blood related. The crux of Izana and Mikey's connection, placing the kindness of Shinichiro at the forefront, makes this story that much more focused on his death being the inciting incident for everything that was to come. It's a shame though, as Izana isn't the central focus of this arc, leaving him to be remembered as a tool used by Kisaki. Granted, his death is the gateway to the final fight of this arc when he comes face to face with Takemichi. The standoff between Kisaki and Takemichi says just as much as it shows. It's the culmination of every single time leap ending in the place where it all began. The reason for all of this suffering and all of this madness can deflate the tension, as it's a childish reason all this started to begin with. Kisaki's explanation for killing Hina reads exactly how it's presented, a childish grudge because of rejection, which is honestly perfect. Despite all of his cunning planning, stoicism is one thing he could never figure out for himself, and his motivation runs parallel to Takemichi's. Love fueled Kisaki's actions just like love fueled Takemichi's actions. It works as an effective payoff of Kisaki's hero line from Valhalla and the revelation of Hina knowing who Kisaki was in the first place. What cements this revelation as such a great one is how Takemichi reacts. He's willing to kill for what he wants, to stop the ultimate evil, even if that means breaking what it means to be a delinquent. But before he can, a random truck pulls that trigger for him. Kisaki's death doesn't have any real emotional impact, but for the actions he's committed, it's still well deserved. He's dealt a disrespectful, painful death. It was only right because he couldn't die with a sense of respect like Baji, self-discovery like Izana, or be carried by someone who loved him like Emma. Kisaki was always guided by his own emotions, his selfishness, and this was the product of that. He used others to prop himself up for his security, to make himself feel powerful, like he was worth something. A natural counter to Takemichi, who made himself worth something thanks to his hard work to overcome his weaknesses as a person. Honestly, this conflict between Takemichi and Kisaki based around love, diverging paths because of that love, and the powerlessness of both individually but the strength from the relationships they forged in opposite ways, paints this as a true finale for the story. But as we all know, this isn't where it ends. Thank you all so much for waiting, and thank you all so much for watching. Please stay safe out there and have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you all next time. The Bonten and Three Deities arcs serve as two final building blocks towards Tokyo Revenger's long-awaited finale. These two arcs are a bit confusing to say the least, as my first impressions were just that, confused. I had no idea how to directly process what these arcs were trying to accomplish in the grand scheme of the story, but as I've reread them, I started to understand a bit more, and this analysis is a product of that. It's because of these arcs' relatively short lengths, I wanted to combine them into one video for you all, so let's get into these two last steps towards the big finish. This is Tokyo Revenger's Bonten and Three Deities arcs. Turning back time for one friend. The opening page of chapter 187 titled Way to Go has each character positioned to depict their current status in the story. Kisaki is off to the side behind Emma and Takemichi as his reign has come to pass. Izana walks away with a smile, pleased to some extent with how his life ended. Emma faces forward, walking with everyone because her death is what incites this loop's failure. Then there's Mikey, who looks up to see darkness regardless of the sun's rays. Hina stands there looking forward while her body faces backwards as she is reminded of the past. Lastly is Takemichi, who looks towards Hina while moving forward. It's fitting for him because he's finally crossed his final hurdle in saving her life, while ignoring Mikey's darkened expression even in sunlight. It's a perfect image to centralize the focus of what these upcoming arcs are supposed to center around, and all of it begins with Takemichi resolving to go back to the future for good. However, at the center of it is his conflict over Kisaki's final words to him. Both of them gave their everything for Hina in different ways. They are parallels to one another because love twisted them to do the impossible. Kisaki, regardless of any time leaps, managed to make his plans work out. Takemichi recognizes this and is reasonably shaken up by it, which is why he wanted to meet Kisaki as equals more often. It's a natural progression of his character development because he's starting to see what pieces of him were in his opposition. A steep contrast to Mikey, who disbands Toman after finding out what lies ahead in the future. Learning all Takemichi has sacrificed to make a bright future for Hina, Mikey does what makes most sense for him. The Toman he fought for, the Toman he made, turned into one of his closest friend's greatest enemies. After losing his sister and so many other family members and friends, Mikey is completely lost without anyone to support him or save him in the way he needed to be rescued. Just as Takemichi had come to an epiphany for what he could do for others, Mikey came to the same conclusion. If one of them was a blessing, the other was the curse. Kisaki wanted to use Mikey for his strength. Shinichiro died indirectly because of him. Kazutora blamed him for going to jail, and Baji died because of Kazutora. Izana, Emma, and most of all Takemichi were all negatively affected because of his involvement and his life. It didn't matter whether or not he was at fault. Living is what caused them all pain. So he had no choice except to fall deeper and deeper into the black until he crossed the line of no return. But that's stepping a bit too far because Takemichi has just returned to the future where everyone he fought so hard for survived in the afterglow of Mikey's fall. A drastic contrast to the previous future, which ended with everyone dying anyways. This change to events in the future makes Mikey's fate directly in Takemichi's hands no matter what happens. Obviously this was always the case, but now it takes precedence over everyone else's fate to an extent. Stopping this near endless cycle begins and ends with saving Mikey, which was pretty much the setup from the beginning. Toman grew so powerful because Mikey was a tool in every timeline to make it so. He's been the central force for Toman turning evil because he was used by someone or loses out to his own pain. Yes, saving Hina was one of Tokyo Revenger's driving goals, however, saving everyone who needed it is what Takemichi promised all the way back in chapter 8. Takemichi's desire to get his perfect fairy tale ending is seemingly impossible though because Naoto no longer wishes to change this future and thus cannot serve as a proper trigger for any more time leaps. Takemichi is alone in trying to solve the issue at its roots so everyone can be happy. Draken's message from the time capsule portrays this isolation perfectly. He's the only one who cries because he cares so much about each and every critical moment of sorrow each and every one of his friends feels. Sure, it's grating, but it's an essential part of his character. A future where everyone he cares for isn't happy isn't a future worth living in. At the core of this interaction is the message of life not being a movie. There isn't always a happy fairy tale ending for every person living their life. So it's not too unreasonable to think that this is where the story could have possibly ended and that Takemichi would have been prepared to move on completely with his life until he saw Mikey's videotape. This videotape is a make or break story moment for Tokyo Revengers, and I don't mean to be dramatic or cliche when I say that. Choosing to throw away his perfect future with Hina and all of his friends being alive can feel like a betrayal of all we as readers have read of Takemichi's journey. Yes, Takemichi has always been greedy, always wanting more, never settling for the bare minimum. Mikey is lost, and like I said, he does deserve to be saved because he's been destroyed in every timeline's outcome. However, his dark impulse tries to explain his emotional outbursts and temporary moments of insanity after losing someone important to him or undergoing some serious traumatic events. Trying to write this into the story after everything we've gone through to explain Mikey's clear mental illness is asinine and just lazy. Mikey is a child who's undergone unimaginable trauma and has never been all there, like ever in the story. If the dark impulse had been described as dark thoughts he has in his mind, it would have been more or less okay, but what this impulse does later in the story is absolutely ludicrous to Mikey's character. All I can say is this reveal in Mikey's video being what spurs Takemichi to time leap one last time isn't the strongest motivator from a reader's perspective and shouldn't be one from Takemichi's perspective. He's destroying every one of his friends' futures and leaving the woman he loves and who loves him back for someone else's sake. Although it is an admirable thing to do for someone you care for and in line with Takemichi's character, after fighting so hard to save Hina for so long only to throw it all away can feel, again, like a betrayal of the reader's time put into this story. At the end of this arc, there's a couple of flashbacks for Mucho and Hanma. These two flashbacks give some history for the characters, but it kind of begs the question of why now? Why do Mucho and Hanma's stories matter now? Bonten was all about Takemichi and Mikey's decisions when creating the future that's been rewritten. Hanma and Mucho don't connect to those themes of loss or perpetual suffering both of these characters had endured and or overcome to reach their perceived peace within this arc. Both of these flashbacks just feel very haphazardly placed within the context of the plot, which is an awkward way to lead into the 5 Deities arc as Takemichi is immediately thrown into everyone's crosshairs trying to recruit him. There's an obvious speed run to introduce this arc's top players, and using old legends of the delinquent world like Takemichi and Draken to force a conflict makes their influence on it pretty big. Unfortunately, the two newly introduced characters of Toronto and Senju don't really matter all that much, so let's start with the most insignificant and forgettable. Toronto is, and there is no other way to explain him, a lazy copy of Taiju, an oversized monster who disrespects people and beats up Inupi. Senju is the only girl around who seems capable of scrapping with the big dogs and lands a few strong looking kicks until she's beaten around by Toronto. I think I'm starting to remember a whole nother arc's dynamic already. She also has literal 20-plus-year-old fighters on her team. This is supposed to represent how dangerous things are getting as literal adults are joining the fight, but all I can think of saying is get a job and stop fighting kids in the street. I'm not even joking, seriously. Benkei and Waka are both almost 30 in 2008. Then there's Mikey. He single-handedly breaks the tension of the 3 Deities arc title in half. But before that, it's best to address some other developments that happened before he decides to break everything that the title is supposed to mean for this arc. There's small development for Senju, and we find out that she has a connection to Sanzu and that she's actually his younger sister. And then there's a setup for Takemichi to somehow gain future vision, which is a can of worms that'll be used to save his ass later on. And aside from that, nothing else really happens except for Draken's untimely death. This decision is just, there is no other way to say it except that it is a net negative for this story as it approaches its final arc. Draken still wanted to save Mikey, and that is in line with his character as he says that Emma speaks to him in dreams telling him to do so. He's perpetually tortured by not being able to save either of them. It gets worse when you consider this reveal is technically still a part of what happens going into the future Takemichi just left, so Draken is presumably still suffering from these dreams. All of this overlaps with Mikey wanting to protect Takemichi's dream for everyone to be happy. He fights some of the strongest members in Toman, some of his closest friends, without a single scratch or attack being landed on him. Furthermore, his impulse turns him into a walking, talking, fighting machine who is effectively unstoppable. He doesn't discriminate. He'll hit friend or foe, all the while being untouchable. It's a complete detachment of the sensitive person Mikey is supposed to be, and contradicts his motivation as he nearly kills the guy he was supposed to be protecting in the first place. He also shows little to no grief over Draken's passing before he destroys any thought of the three deities arc meaning a single damn thing. He destroys South easily, who easily destroys Senju, and thus Mikey reigns supreme. There's a comparison between his assault on Kazutora and now, which isn't even a decent comparison because of the big bad word context. Mikey's willingness to kill Kazutora was out of revenge. It was an extreme emotional response from a teenager who lost two very important people to the same exact person. In this context, it made perfect sense that he would just lose his mind. Takemichi bringing up this comparison is not that at all. Draken was done in by a random thug. Toronto is a random person with zero connection to anyone we've ever seen before. It is nothing except a plot device darkness because trauma doesn't justify Mikey's actions anymore. Not that putting several of his friends 6 feet under made any sense either in any of the previous timelines. Sitting on this as the arc's conclusion felt empty and begs the question, what was the point? Draken gets knocked off for no reason. He's discarded from the final battle and can't even move on properly because really, he died a failure. He's watched his closest friend twist and contort into a monster in numerous timelines, and he can't even save him in the end. Draken is one of the most tragic and sad characters in Tokyo Revengers. He's a great guy who loves the people he cares for, stands up for them, and won't ever back down from any challenge no matter who or what he's up against. He's probably the story's best and most relatable or compelling character. Hell, he's everything Takemichi is with the ability to scrap with the best of them. It's a damn shame that he was killed off like this at the end. Speaking of the end of things, these two arcs don't present the best stepping stones to the end of the story. Bonten is mainly there to convince the audience and Takemichi that Mikey has to be saved for all of us to be satisfied. Three Deities is empty except for the sloppy setup for Takemichi's future vision and Mikey's dark impulse, making him a complete lunatic. Sure, it sets the stage for what's to come and introduces a lot of characters for the big finale, but that's really it. Unfortunately, these two arcs feel like steps back for the story's progress more than they feel like they push it forward. Mikey's actions are rewritten apparently. Takemichi magically gets future sight and Draken can't even surpass his pain naturally. It feels like major changes were made to fit a glove the story wasn't alluding to from the very beginning. Fortunately, that's all I have for today. I'll see you all next time for my coverage of Tokyo Revengers' final story arc and my thoughts on the series as a whole. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Please stay safe out there and have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you all next time. Welcome back everyone to the 8th and final part of my Tokyo Revengers story analysis. Coming into this final arc after Bonten and Three Deities is a bit annoying because this week's material feels like a step up and 2 steps down in comparison because of their setup. Introducing Future Vision out of nowhere and recontextualizing Mikey's emotional driven actions are some of the craziest turnarounds in the entire story. It feels like a whole is trying to be covered with the Dark Impulse because his turn in the future where he murders everyone, especially in the previous loop, made no real sense. To say it again, his trauma stopped being able to justify his actions, so he needed some sensible way to explain it, which the story pretty much failed on completely. Takemichi's future vision fits into a similar suit come to the end of this arc, which ties perfectly into talking about this final arc altogether. Once again, I welcome you all back to my analysis of Tokyo Revengers' final arc, Kanto Manji, the end of a long journey. Having fully recovered from his injuries, Takemichi decides to form his own Toman. Taking it upon himself to gather up all his friends and allies he's made along his journey through his actions feels like a full circle moment. Toman was founded on the bonds of the original members shared with one another, with Mikey being the nucleus. Takemichi now stands as not only a perfect representation of a delinquent, but also the essence of Toman itself. He's the nucleus, and gathering up the natural choices led him to Mitsuya in the wake of Draken's sudden passing. Steeped in his pain and trying to become a professional designer as Draken wanted him to, he manages to put on an amazing fashion show before wearing his Toman uniform in front of the fashion community that accepted and praised his ability, something he rejected deflects in favor of standing beside his friends. The turnaround for Mitsuya's grief feels a bit too fast for readers to actually sit on it. It also misses out on the possibility for some essential members of Toman not wanting to be a part of this life anymore, so they just reject Takemichi's offer outright. However, his ability to simultaneously win the Newcomer Fashionista Award and join up with his friends again fulfills both of Draken's desires for him. Him shaving his head to reveal his dragon tattoo pays homage to his relationship with Draken as well. Regardless of his brief slump, Mitsuya comes out on top with his saying from the Black Dragon's arc fully intact. He won't hate the situation he was born into, instead he'll keep moving forward with his friends at his back. From that perspective, the critique of it being too short for the plot's sake or him just not wanting to join doesn't follow too well. Mitsuya continues to be a great character who lives up to his philosophy about life. As the new Toman begins to bolster its ranks more and more, Takemichi goes on to recruit Senju. Senju offers a bit more backstory about Mikey and his dark impulses by telling a story of how he severely injured Haruchiro over a model airplane being broken, which makes Mikey to be a crazy person through and through now. Moving on from this, Senju decides to follow Takemichi, completing Toman's new lineup. Now the ball is fully in his court with others to stand beside him. This is what completes his character because he's finally decided not to carry all of this on his own. Everyone in this new form of Toman is willing to fight for and beside him. Still, that doesn't bring him much comfort as Hina stays to ground him in reality like she's always done. Takemichi yelling his fear to the world in the Toman uniform, still willing to fight, prepares him for his final battle. He's no longer the child running from everything, but a man capable of taking responsibility for his actions and having the determination to pull through no matter what. It's a breakthrough, full circle moment, giving the readers a reminder of where he started. It's a perfect moment before everything comes to a head.
Can't escape from crossing fate. Fight!
Toman vs. Toman is a battle of philosophy and fighting against the odds. What's more, its setup reflects the Tenjiku conflict perfectly. Draken's passing, just like Emma's, invites violence between two factions who were connected and disconnected from him. This is where we understand Mikey's alignment with Izana's detached emotional state. He's beginning to fully embrace what he struggled through. Similarly, where that arc's battle waited for Mikey to arrive, this one waits for him to be defeated, exactly like Tenjiku was waiting for Izana to be defeated. Mikey's Toman mirrors Izana's Tenjiku to a T. He has a group of brutal, impressive fighters who have almost zero friendly connection to one another or relationships. All they do is follow the leader, lost in their darkest impulses because Mikey sits at the top of the food chain. He's beyond friendships, family, and genuine connection. All he's got is his strength and back for everyone to follow him. Takemichi's Toman, similar to the battle against Tenjiku, is a ragtag group of friends who managed to gather up because of his ability to connect with each of them. He channels the real Toman while Mikey channels the fake one, a real face-off of two different philosophies for building a gang. This is effectively communicated through how the first fight operates. Kakucho versus Takemichi demonstrates how much he's been underestimated. Kakucho easily beat Takemichi before, but now he's not willing to go down after one punch because his drive is far too strong for him to lose that easily. Kakucho's connections to others have been his Achilles heel, so to speak. His admiration turns into devotion so easily. Yet, Izana's influence on him pushes the brawler forward into a head-on battle with his childhood hero. Showing his resolve to live up to what he believes is correct is equal to that of Takemichi's, bringing their fight to a standstill throughout this conflict as it develops. The rest of these fights are mainly between different characters settling their respective debts with enemies from the Tenjiku conflict. They're mainly all self-contained and not too much to write home about, except for the satisfaction they give everyone. There's definitely some notable ones like Koko coming back to Inupi's side and Haruchiro beating Senju. Regardless though, Senju, Koko, and Inupi are the first to fall, then Pa is next. Mikey beating one of his friends into the dirt like this is a bitter moment for sure. All Pa wanted to do was see his friend smiling, while Mikey offers no response at all, like their relationship just never mattered to him. Naturally, with their limited forces, Toman is hitting its limit with all of its notable fighters falling like dominoes, and of course Takemichi gets a vision of the future where everyone is murdered by Sanzu. Yeah, this is where everything begins to spiral out of control a bit. Sanzu is by far the most out of left field reveal for me, aside from the dark impulses. There's no build-up or hints to the relationship he and Mikey actually share together, and his fanatical devotion to him after receiving his injuries doesn't really follow much either. He's just a troublemaker for the sake of having someone cause chaos. Him murdering everyone presumably doesn't bother Mikey either, as he was willing to kill Pa apparently, and honestly all this this just comes out of nowhere, and as a result, Kakucho is killed. To some extent, he had it coming by allying with Mikey, reflecting on his close call during Tenjiku, but this time it's actually real. Kakucho is obviously misguided. Had he followed Takemichi, there's no doubt his passing would have been much more emotional, or he just wouldn't have died at all. Still, it would have made Taiju's appearance that much more meaningful. Taiju arriving at the 11th hour is just poetic. Hitting Haruchiro with a motorcycle that should have literally killed him is a crazy entrance too, though. He only came to see Takemichi fight Mikey, which is like so definitely something Taiju would do, and then he proceeds to solo several members and beat Benkei and Waka. He is legitimately what happens when the boss character joins your team and works exactly as advertised when you face them. He turns the tables so everything is even, and the two leaders can finally face off one-on-one. For the moment, I'm going to forgo Mikey and Shinichiro's backstories to give my critiques of them later on in the video. The purpose of these backstories is to understand where the Dark Impulse comes from, so I'll leave it at that for now. Anyways, after Mikey decides to knock out his teammates and even out the playing field for some reason, it's up to the leaders to duke it out. Unfortunately, what could have been an interesting fight of reflexes and knowledge colliding together turns out to be Future Vision counters every and anything. Takemichi shouldn't be able to feasibly react to anything Mikey does accurately, like at all. The story makes it a point to emphasize how much damage he's taken to the point his vision is blurry as hell. It's not very believable he would have been able to block and nevertheless counter anything thrown his way by basically anyone at this point. Despite those, quite frankly, predictable, unbelievable turn of events, the ending of this fight is powerful in a way. Takemichi shouldering Mikey's struggles and sacrificing himself to embrace his friend makes for a wonderful two-page spread. Furthermore, passing on his time leap powers to Mikey in his final moments is honestly ironic. What spawned a curse through his brother's time leaps had been given back to him, giving him the autonomy to change his fate alongside the one person who never gave up on him to the end. Naturally, Tokyo Revenger's ending is as picturesque as possible. Everyone's alive and living out their lives peacefully. Takemichi gets married to Hina, and that's kind of just the end of it. Mikey is perfectly fine. Everyone is, again, alive and well. So let's talk about the ending of this story. There are three key things that I want to address about the finale that made all of this possible. 1 is Shinichiro, 2 is Mikey, and 3 is time leaping. Shinichiro being a time leaper has nothing to do with anything in this story except the dark impulse plaguing Mikey. This is stated to be a product of his actions, and since this is the case, it makes one wonder why Hina wasn't subjected to the same dark impulse. Takemichi jumping back and forth should have resulted in a similar turn for Hina, unless because of the way he acquired the ability happened to be the correct, and I say that with quotes, correct way of gaining it. This is purely hypothetical or is simply a theory because it's never really explained how the transfer of the ability actually affects others. Just because Takemichi received the ability doesn't mean his target for leaping shouldn't be cursed as well. I guess a girl with 0 combat expertise who's 110 soaking wet isn't the biggest threat to other people. While saying Hina dying in every timeline could be seen as the curse manifesting itself, it doesn't make any sense because Hisaki caused all of that. So there's no explanation aside from the way he received the ability was correct, or the author failed to flesh out the concept properly. I'm betting on the second option. A curse born of love is a very real idea in the story though, as it affects the actions of Kisaki, Mikey, Takemichi, and several other characters. However, it starts to twist its message when it results in a literal curse from time leaping. Love is a self-inflicted curse demonstrated throughout the narrative, not the product of a supernatural force. This trickles down and interacts poorly with Mikey's story as it transforms his trauma into something it isn't. Just like in the Black Dragons arc, Mikey's clear emotional instability is characterized as him going evil or being a bad person. He's not evil or a bad person inherently. He's a mentally damaged teenager. One of the biggest examples of the dark impulse blatantly changing his character is when he was about to kill Kazutora. I'm gonna put these 2 pages on the screen side by side and the development of this exact scene in the Valhalla arc versus how the final arc contextualizes this scene. Dialogue and direction changes a scene's meaning and its subtext. Mikey did not care about Takemichi being here at all. It was a minor surprise, but nothing that was meant to change him. Baji brought the light back to Mikey's eyes, not Takemichi's intervention. Recontextualizing the scene changes its meaning and dynamics completely. It diminishes Baji's sacrifice. Mikey was never dependent upon Takemichi in any way until after the Black Dragons arc. The story tells us that much. The Dark Impulse doesn't do anything except twist everything into a specific mold we as readers were never given to begin with, which leads me to our last talking point. What happens to the consciousness of Takemichi in every timeline? It's clear that the past version and present version are two totally different people as stated by Hina. So is a previous personality just subdued until Takemichi returns to the future? If so, then he's growing up to having taken his younger self's place and consent over his body forever. Obviously it's for the greater good, but it's still pretty damn cruel of him. And we could go even further with this, but I think it's best if we stop right there. Overall, I believe Tokyo Revengers is a story which carved out its own identity for sure. There isn't anything in manga that is very similar to it, I think. While I think that there are definitely better time travel and rewind back to zero type stories you could experience, Tokyo Revengers doesn't aim to be a copy of anything on the market. It's a unique story with ups and downs like any other piece of art. Ultimately though, my opinion on it is it's a hard 6 out of 10. There's definitely highlights, but the lows with character motivation, art, paneling, and dark impulses are so bad it feels like it bogs down the story to no end at times. Still though, I want to thank those who stuck with this series. I appreciate your patience and support. Every like or comment is something I cherish greatly over the course of making videos for this series. Give me recommendations for what you want me to analyze next, and I'll definitely take a look. And with that, it brings me to the end of this video. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Please stay safe out there and have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you all next time.